This is the Khmer Times News. My name is Paolo Bonini, and these are your headlines. Violence in Sihanoukville flares up yet again as blood and bodies hit the pavement. The killer that has ravaged the planet is back, and it is the youth that is perpetuating the rise in HIV. And Cambodia is top of the charts as a place to retire. But firstly, our headline story. Well, it all seemed to go very quiet in Sihanoukville for some weeks. The organised crime gangs appear to have stopped tossing people out of windows, gunning them down in the street, and kidnapping victims in broad daylight. But this week, we saw the flash and glimmer of cold steel as victims fell to the pavement dead after receiving multiple stab wounds by thugs whose only aim is to grab a slice of the illegal profits being made by callous and vicious crime groups.
The first incident led to special forces of the Sihanoukville police to arrest 7 Chinese men after an attack that left 3 of their compatriots seriously injured at a Sihanoukville hotel, one of which has been sent for emergency treatment in Phnom Penh in an attempt to save his life. The brawl caused many a phone call to be made as they urgently requested help, and it was then that specialised forces rushed to the scene. And on arrival, they found that a number of suspects had already fled. But however, they did manage to apprehend 7 thugs at the location. A location that was drenched in blood by this outrageous breach of law. Fortunately, it only gets worse, as there was a further incident this week where 12 people have been arrested for a murder of a young man, and that took place directly in front of a casino in Sihanoukville. Now, these incidents yet again tarnish Cambodia's well-deserved reputation as a country that is peaceful, and one that is extremely safe to live in. It is these incidents by these gun runners, these drug dealers, these kidnappers, these merchants of chaos that are shattering the kingdom's good name. They seem to think that by applying extreme violence, they can capture some of the illegal trade in online fraud, drugs, and human trafficking. And that is where the core of the problem lays, gentle viewer. Not in the knife that is thrust deep into the belly of the victim, who slumps to the pavement and dies in a pool of his own blood, but in the motivation that caused the death, and that is organised crime. For with profits from drugs and other illegal activities running into the hundreds of millions of dollars annually, the dead kid on the pavement is little more than a statistic, one that will only ever grow until the flow of drugs, scams, and human trafficking is tolerated no more and is finally brought to a full and final end.
Some will tell you that ignorance is bliss, but I'm here to tell you it isn't. It can leave the spectre of death looming over you. And that's the story that dominates this week's Crime Desk. This week's Crime Desk has one single story, and it is the crime of ignorance. Now, trust me when I tell you, if you ever stand in front of a judge and you are charged with breaking the law in some way, never ever plead you did not know you were doing wrong. For pleading ignorance is absolutely no defence at all. And in this story, the ignorance shown by some of the youth in Cambodia will not have a judge slap them with a stern warning, nor a fine, or even a short spell in jail. What it will deliver them is a verdict of looming death. For it is solely down to ignorance that the scourge of HIV/AIDS is no longer declining, but is making a very unwelcome return.
Deputy Director of the National AIDS Authority has said that the 2025 target to end HIV/AIDS in Cambodia is now very unlikely due to increasing cases. Owing to the current cases of AIDS infections, he said, Cambodia's strategic goal was to put an end to HIV/AIDS infections by 2025, 5 years before the United Nations goal. There has been an alarming increase of 1,400 new infections. Now note, that is not the total, that is just new cases that have been found, 50% of which are male-on-male sex. But the second highest is young people who have now been infected, and that rate is up by 42%. The incidence of HIV/AIDS was first recorded in Cambodia in 1991, and it spread very quickly through the kingdom. But then, from 2000 to 2010, the infection rate in Cambodia started to decrease. But now AIDS is making a comeback, and at current, the total number of people with HIV in Cambodia is 76,000 people. The new infections are occurring mostly amongst the age group of 15 to 24 years old. And that is extremely worrying, for it is that very age group who should be fully educated as to the dangers of unprotected sex. The World Health Organization has reported that 650,000 people died of HIV in 2021. But do you want to know a really frightening number? Well, over 40 million people have been killed by HIV globally. And to see these latest figures not only represent a resurgence of this killer, but it is the young who are choosing to ignore all calls for caution. And it is the young who have the most to lose.
Alarming antibiotic prescribing practices within Cambodia have been disclosed in an in-depth study covering low to middle income nations, and what those numbers reveal is simply staggering. For the report concludes that 3/4 of antibiotics prescribed to children are completely unnecessary, and on occasions it is not just one single antibiotic that is prescribed, but a barrage of them. And this now has kids below the age of 2 at a very serious threat of antibiotic-resistant superbugs.
In a recent medical journal, a report looked into inappropriate antibiotic prescriptions to young children in 3 low to middle income countries. They were Madagascar, Senegal, and Cambodia. It is well known that antibiotic overuse and inappropriate prescriptions drive antibiotic resistance. And this is super worrying when you learn that antibiotic-resistant bacterial infections are appearing in children below the age of 2 years old. And we live in a time when infant mortality is something that we left behind in the Victorian era, a time when every undertaker had a good stock of child-sized coffins. The thoroughly researched report noted that during children's consultations, doctors had been inappropriately prescribing antibiotics to many children, even for conditions that required no antibiotic therapy. Moreover, some children had received multiple antibiotic prescriptions during a single consultation, making the whole thing a complete nonsense. The end results of this in-depth study were truly shocking, for 1/4 of all adult outpatients did not require any antibiotic therapy, but they got it anyway. But much more shocking is 3 3/4 of all children who received a consultation ended up with antibiotic prescriptions that were wholly inappropriate and, in fact, are harming children by contributing to the emergence of antibiotic resistance. And here is the horror for the future. Without the magic bullet that is effective antibiotics, the child-sized coffins so common in the Victorian era will make an unwelcome return.
As a young child, I would listen to my parents playing songs by the crooners, like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. And I, like all those of 50+ years, saw living in a country drenched in sunshine and having a cocktail by the poolside the reserve of those who appeared in movies. Only the rich and famous could attain such a heightened level of nirvana. It honestly was a dream of mine to be as carefree as they were, and even wear a pastel sweater over my shoulders, as was the rage back then. Well, that impossible dream is now very much a reality for so many retirees, and you would never guess, but dear old Cambodia is now the 3rd most desirable country to retire to.
Cambodia has taken 3rd place in the International Living World's Best Retirement Destination Index. Vietnam was ranked as number 1 place to retire, and that was followed by Bali at number 2. And with Cambodia's continued growth and modernisation, it may well be on its way to taking the number 1 spot for those retirees who've got a little bit of money. Retirees work out very well for a nation, you see, for they not only pay for their visas, but more importantly, inject ongoing capital into local economies, funded by their pensions. And due to the rising cost of living and the absurd property prices in many developed nations, fleeing to the sun seems like a very sound choice. Add into this the large elderly demographics that are a drain on some countries' resources. As an example, Japan, quite incredibly, has 30% of its population over the age of 65. Italy has 25%. But then again, you don't see many Italians leaving Italy to live abroad. And the sole reason for that is they live in Italy. And man, is that a beautiful country. But for many, Cambodia is an amazingly good choice. There is hardly any crime, and Cambodia offers one of the lowest costs of living in the whole of Southeast Asia, which makes it ideal for someone on a fixed pension. But what staggers me is how Cambodia seems to be inflation-proof. I have lived here for 15 years, and dining out and property rental costs have hardly changed at all. And with the banks offering 7% on savings, that is a fact that bewilders many of my friends in the West, your nest egg will perform incredibly well. But there is a note of caution. Do not be dragged into the trail of tears, which is cheap booze, and end up on a bar stool telling fanciful tales of lost wealth and how you were once in the special forces. Lord knows, we have way too many of those idiots already.
It's time to have a look ahead and see what the weather has in store for us next week.
There's nothing here of any surprise, because guess what? That's right, more rain is on the way, and there's lightning over those hills as well. And here's a little fact for you. Do you know what sheet lightning is? I didn't know this. And what it is, in fact, is a lightning bolt that lights up the underside of a cloud. I never knew that. But be careful how you use that expression when you're in front of the vicar. You know, and you go, sheet lightning. You've got to be very careful with that one. So we're going to expect more lightning, more rain, but a little less on the humidity.
This has been the Khmer Times News. Please do subscribe and comment and stay up to date with all the breaking news by following us on both Facebook and Telegram. This has been Paolo Bonini, and that was the week that was. I'll see you next weekend for your weekly Roundup.